In today's video, we look at workers who tragically lost their lives on the job. From a tropical hike cut short by one of the world's deadliest birds, to an aquarium diver pulled under by sharks. But first, inside a zoo, what should have been a simple renovation turned into a fatal encounter. It was May 17, 2017 in Manila, Philippines. The zoo opened to a thin weekday crowd, and the tiger exhibit sat quiet under a cloudy sky. The viewing deck remained open while the habitat itself was closed for renovation. Miguel Santos was 58, a senior construction worker from a small contracting firm brought in during the zoo's long-delayed renovations. The tiger enclosure, first built decades earlier, needed new barriers, reinforced glass, and updated safety gates. Miguel was meticulous and quiet. He was known for straight lines and tight joints. Near retirement, with 3 kids and a mortgage almost finished, he took overtime because the zoo project paid better than road work. He had no animal experience, but he knew job site hazards. He double-tied ladders, taped sharp edges, and logged tool checks with a stub pencil behind his ear. His goal was simple: finish the steel framing so the glazing team could install thicker panes the following week. The foreman relayed that animal care had shifted the Bengal tiger into the off-show holding pen. The crew believed the habitat was clear. The exhibit was a shallow bowl ringed by a 12-foot concrete barrier and thick viewing glass set in steel frames. A service gate opened from a rear maintenance lane onto the habitat floor. Bengal tigers can reach 10 feet, nose to tail, and typically weigh 500 to 700 pounds, with some captive males heavier. Hind legs drive explosive bursts that cover ground faster than a person can run. The bite crushes bone. In captivity, they map routine around feeding doors, gates, and keeper movement. At close range, startle turns nearby motion into a target. Warnings stacked up that morning. The animal care whiteboard showed a yellow tag by the tiger's name, meaning location must be verified before any work. A radio call from holding asked for confirmation that the slide bolt was secured. 2 grounds workers reported a metallic clunk near the rear service gate at 10:15 a.m. None of it felt urgent to the crew. The foreman waved scaffolding forward and told Miguel to start marking anchor points. At 10:40 a.m., Miguel stepped through the service gate and followed the concrete curb, counting fasteners slated for removal. He knelt to measure a gap while ratchets clicked from co-workers setting the work deck above. The mechanical noise masked soft footfalls in the planted corner. The tiger came out of the foliage low and straight, a large orange and black shape that seemed to appear rather than arrive. Miguel looked up from his tape and froze. Workers outside the barrier shouted and banged poles on the rail. He turned left, then right, searching for a door within reach, but the service gate sat too far behind. The tiger closed the distance with a surge that put its chest into him and drove him down onto concrete. The impact knocked the wind from him. Witnesses saw the animal's jaws clamp onto his shoulder and drive him flat. From above, workers reported seeing him dragged across the wet floor toward shade by the rock shelf where the tiger usually rested. Later, medical findings confirmed deep, crushing injuries to the shoulder and chest, consistent with the initial bite and pressure of the animal's weight. Noise filled the enclosure. A radio crackled with static as the foreman called for help. Fabric tore as the tiger adjusted its grip for leverage. Miguel tried to push against the floor, but a heavy paw pinned him between the shoulders. From above, workers shouted and banged poles against the rail, but it clattered harmlessly on the concrete, doing nothing to break the tiger's focus. The tiger then shifted its hold lower along his side to drag him farther, a motion steady and efficient. Under the combined force of teeth, weight, and torque, ribs gave way. Blood pooled quickly, spreading in a thin sheet across the concrete. Zoo staff ran along the service lane carrying tranquilizer darts and a rifle. With visitors behind glass and staff in the line, the keeper held fire, and the vet opted for darts. Procedure required 1 keeper to verify a clear line while a second loaded. Seconds stretched as the animal settled its forepaws and worried the body with small, deliberate pulls. Miguel moved once more, a reflex lift of the head. The tiger released, took a new hold, and dragged him a few feet deeper. The first dart struck behind the shoulder. The tiger flinched, spun broadside, and kept its head low. Minutes passed as it paced unsteadily, eyes fixed on the rail. A second dart thudded in. The animal staggered, backing into the plants, and only after several more moments did its legs give out and it collapsed in the shade. When the team entered, The tiger's eyes were half-lidded, and its breathing had slowed. Paramedics crouched, checked briefly for a pulse, then stepped back. There was nothing left to do. One visitor's phone captured fragments of the scene. Later, investigators matched the audio of ratchets, shouts, and 2 dart reports to statements. They carried Miguel out on a rigid backboard. Tested afterward, investigators found the holding pen slide bolt had not been fully seated, leaving just enough play for the tiger to push through. At the same time, the service gate had been propped ajar for tool access, creating a direct path into the enclosure. Logs showed no final verification call. The review quietly traced failure to miscommunication between animal care and the contractor, compounded by an unchecked warning tag and a rushed start. The deck reopened the next week. On the whiteboard, the line that should have stopped the day was underlined in red: verify location before entry. The tragedy inside the zoo showed how a single lapse in protocol can open the way for disaster. Yet out in the rainforest, no gates or walls stand between people and the animals that live there. And one bird carries a weapon as deadly as any predator's teeth. It was July 14th, 2016, in the rainforest near Mission Beach, Queensland. The trail was quiet in the heavy morning air, broken only by insects and the movement of leaves. Daniel Brooks, a 47-year-old wildlife enthusiast from Oregon who had taken leave from his job as a high school biology teacher to travel through northern Australia. Known among friends for his deep interest in birds, Daniel had spent years leading field trips for students and volunteering with local conservation groups back home. His trip to Australia was part of a personal project to photograph rare species in their native habitats, hoping to eventually compile them into a book for young readers. He was careful and deliberate, but also ambitious, sometimes choosing less traveled paths to get the perfect image. Daniel's plan for that day was straightforward: a short solo hike near Mission Beach, an area advertised for its cassowary crossings. Locals knew the birds appeared frequently along shaded trails and creek beds, particularly where fruiting trees dropped their bounty. For Daniel, the chance to observe and photograph one of the world's largest and most unusual birds was worth the early start. He carried his DSLR camera, a tripod strapped to his pack, and a day's worth of water. The choice to go alone was typical for him, confident that his field experience and measured patience would keep him safe. The forest around Mission Beach was dense, with ferns stretching shoulder-high and heavy canopy closing in overhead. The air was wet and still, thick with the smell of rotting fruit. Trails narrowed into passages between strangler figs and palms, their roots twisting across the ground. Every step carried the muffled crunch of leaf litter. For someone with Daniel's eye, it was a perfect scene, an enclosed world where a glimpse of a cassowary might appear at any bend. The southern cassowary is one of the heaviest modern birds, reaching up to 6 feet tall and weighing more than 120 pounds. Its helmet-like casque, deep blue neck, and vivid red wattles make it unmistakable, but its most notable weapon lies in its legs. On each foot, the inner toe carries a dagger-like claw, often 4 to 5 inches long, sharp enough to slice flesh with a single kick. Normally shy, cassowaries can turn aggressive if threatened, cornered, or defending food. In such moments, they lunge forward with explosive power, kicking upward to slash. Fatal incidents are rare, but when they occur, they leave little doubt about the bird's capacity for violence. Daniel had read about the cassowary's danger, but the warnings felt distant compared to the excitement of finally seeing one in the wild. Park signs reminded visitors not to approach or feed the birds, while local shopkeepers often repeated the same advice. Earlier that morning, another hiker mentioned fresh tracks along the trail, but Daniel took it as encouragement. To him, it was proof he might finally get the photograph he had been chasing for years. His cautious nature gave way to determination, and he pressed farther along the shaded track. Not long into the walk, he noticed the smell of fermenting fruit stronger than before, and scattered across the trail lay half-eaten figs. Moments later, the brush ahead moved. Out stepped a cassowary, taller than Daniel's chest, its casque gleaming damp in the light. The bird's stance was rigid. Feathers bristled along its body, throat pulsing with low, booming notes. Daniel raised his camera slowly, thinking he had the perfect moment. What he failed to notice was the smaller bird deeper in the undergrowth, a juvenile, explaining the adult's tense posture. The encounter escalated quickly. The cassowary lowered its head and began pacing, shifting side to side before lunging forward. Daniel backed up, but the narrow trail and thick roots left little room to retreat. He raised his arms in an instinctive gesture, and the bird leapt. The impact was later described in reports as a heavy collision, followed by tearing, consistent with claw wounds and damage to his clothing. The claw sliced into Daniel's thigh, opening a deep wound. He staggered, dropping his camera onto the dirt as the cassowary struck again. The second kick drove Daniel backward into the undergrowth. Each strike came with a grunt from the bird and the rip of claw against flesh. His cries echoed through the trees, frantic and short, as the cassowary continued to drive forward. He tried to shield himself, but the bird's weight and power pressed him down. Leaves shook violently with each impact. Blood spread quickly across the ground, dark against the green foliage, while his dropped tripod clattered nearby. Within seconds, the bird stepped back, feathers slicked and head jerking as if reassessing the threat. Daniel barely moved, breaths shallow, as he tried to push himself up. The cassowary turned and strode back into the trees. The forest quieted again, leaving only the rustle of disturbed leaves and the faint hum of insects returning. Later that morning, another pair of hikers found Daniel lying half in, half out of the undergrowth. His camera lens was cracked, but the memory card remained intact, holding the last frames he had taken. Medical examination noted deep leg and shoulder wounds, along with internal injuries from a powerful blow to the torso that caused severe blood loss. Park rangers noted that the fruiting figs nearby had likely drawn both the bird and its juvenile, making the attack a defensive one rather than unprovoked aggression. Daniel's belongings were returned to his family, including the final photographs, blurred frames of a towering bird against dark foliage. For the community, the event was a reminder that even the rarest encounters can turn fatal, and that the line between observation and intrusion in the wild remains dangerously thin. The rainforest encounter proved how even a brief moment on the wrong trail can turn fatal. But danger isn't always hidden in the wild. Sometimes it waits in the places where humans and animals cross paths every single day. It was May 12, 2018, in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains, North Carolina. Dawn came gray over the resort. Behind staff housing, dumpsters sat under a humming security light. It looked routine, but lids were warped. Paw smears streaked the aluminum. Carl Pierce was 60, the grounds crew lead. He had worked winters plowing in town and summers at the resort. The pay covered a small mortgage and helped his daughter at community college. He liked to start the trash run before the first shuttle bus, to have the pad sprayed before guests woke. A wet gravel path ran to the dumpster pad, boxed by a block wall on two sides and a stand of rhododendrons on the third. Black bears here are smaller than brown bears out west, but a mature sow still weighs 150 to 250 pounds. They are fast for short bursts, about 30 miles per hour. Shoulders carry climbing muscle. Jaws can crush bone. Bears conditioned to food learn schedules and routes to dumpsters. A sow with yearlings defends both cubs and food at close range. Every system had carried a caution. The security log listed a sow with cubs near the lot at 3:40 a.m. A corkboard notice told staff to use the back route and make noise by the dumpsters. A paper slip on the housing gate urged workers to bang lids before entering. Carl had the horn at hand, but he planned to move fast. He wheeled an empty bin to the pad. Hinges on the second dumpster had slipped. He meant to strap the lid before the hauler arrived. He rounded the block corner with the bin in front of him, tires grinding on gravel. The bear stood 15 feet away, head down in a spill of torn bags. Two cubs scrambled into the rhododendron and froze. The sow lifted her nose, popped her jaws, and huffed. Carl stopped with hands on the bin handle. He backed a step. The wheel caught a stone and the bin slapped the wall. The sound jumped sharp in the enclosure. She came forward in a low rush that covered the gap in 3 bounds. Carl jerked the bin between them. It skated offline. Her shoulder drove it into his legs. He went down on the gravel. The bin rolled and banged the wall. She reached him in the same motion. A forepaw slammed his thigh. Claws raked and turned him. Teeth took his lower leg through the pant, a deep clamp that lifted then drove him down. He shouted once. The radio scraped concrete and clicked open. Carl twisted to crawl for the opening. The sow bit again at the calf and shook. A tight side-to-side measured in inches. Gravel drove into his palms. He grabbed for the bin rim and missed. She released, hooked him with a paw, and rolled him onto his back. She loomed over his hips, breath wet with food, ears forward, head low. She bit high on the thigh and held. The pressure crushed muscle against bone. He kicked with his free leg and struck ribs. The bear flinched but kept her weight on him, jaws locked high on the thigh until the crash of the air horn broke her focus. Two co-workers heard the bin crash and a shout. They ran from the shop, one with a flashlight, the other the cart's air horn. At the lane, they saw the sow over a man, cubs clinging in the brush. The horn blasted once. The sow's head snapped up. She stood a heartbeat, then stepped back, swinging to keep the cubs in view, and moved to the bushes. Carl pushed with his elbows along the gravel. Blood spread under him and tracked where he slid. His radio carried his breath and a broken word. The flashlight beam trembled across the wall, the bin, the bear at the brush line watching with head high. The horn sounded again. The sow collected the cubs and moved behind the building into trees. Co-workers dragged Carl clear and set him on the lane. One pressed a towel into the high thigh wound, and another kept pressure on the calf. The radio call to 911 was clipped and plain. A security camera overlooking the lot captured fragments of the incident. The bin slamming, the sudden rush, and shapes moving across the gravel before co-workers dragged him clear. Paramedics arrived in minutes, but the bear's bite had severed the femoral artery. Blood loss was catastrophic. They applied a tourniquet, started oxygen, and worked to stabilize him for transport. He lost consciousness and did not regain it. Later, wildlife officers followed tracks and camera footage to the sow. She was trapped that evening and euthanized. The two cubs, old enough to move, were relocated deeper into forest. The resort enclosed the dumpster pad with steel doors and added a second gate so the area formed a sally port. New policy barred solo runs at dawn and dusk and required an air horn and radio check before entry. Carl's key ring and radio were returned to his family, and his jacket, torn at the sleeve and stained at the hem. The service was held in a small chapel off the highway. On the shop corkboard, the notice stayed, this time with fresh staples and a line under the last instruction: verify the area before entry. The dumpster attack showed how routine tasks can collide with wild instincts in an instant. And on the other side of the world, another worker would find out how much faster the strike comes when the threat rises from the water below. It was August 14th, 2018, in the Northern Territory of Australia. The Mary River was high from a week of constant rain, its surface moving under thick clouds. Maintenance crews worked along the levee, clearing trash in preparation for the next storm. Andrew Collins was 43, a maintenance contractor hired by the local council. He worked on floodwall inspections and debris removal, taking long jobs in remote towns. Married with 2 sons, he lived in Darwin but spent weeks away in work camps, counting on steady jobs to pay his mortgage. Co-workers knew him for his hands-on skills with equipment and for taking on tough jobs. Crocodiles were a known risk in the Northern Territory, but Andrew had never had a close encounter in over 10 years on the job. His job that day was to tie down a floating pile of logs stuck against a work platform. Once the debris was secured, a crane could pull it away. Crews had talked about crocodile sightings that week, and the area had been marked as active. Andrew carried a wooden pole used to test the ground and check the water depth along the shore, but he believed that staying on the levee edge would keep him safe. The Mary River is known for its saltwater crocodiles, top predators that can grow beyond 17 feet and often exceed 1,500 pounds, with rare giants heavier. They hide in dark water, pushed by a powerful tail, able to launch upward in an almost straight surge. Their jaws close with crushing force, and once they grab prey, they use a death roll, spinning to tear flesh and overpower. Crocodiles in this area are territorial and ambush hunters, reacting to movement at the water's edge. Earlier that week, a ranger patrol had spotted a large crocodile moving downstream near the bridge, and a work notice told crews to avoid going within 6 feet of the shore without a spotter. Locals walking on the floodwall had yelled about big ones seen near the log pile. Andrew heard the warnings but kept working. He wanted the logs tied down before the crane showed up later that morning. At 9:40 a.m., he walked down the levee slope and stood on a narrow platform partly underwater from recent floods. He leaned forward to wrap a rope around the biggest log. The water was muddy brown, filled with sticks and grass. Debris rafts collect bait fish and carrion along the eddies, and big crocodiles patrol them. He tapped his pole once, then put it down to free his hands. Above him, a co-worker checked his radio and called in his position. There was no rated anchor on the platform, so fall arrest lanyards weren't clipped. The river surface stayed still. Without warning, a surge burst from directly below. A crocodile estimated at 14 feet shot upward, jaws open, hitting Andrew from the side. Witnesses said the attack was quick and silent, followed by water exploding over the platform. His hard hat flew off and rolled down the levee slope. The crocodile's jaws locked over his thigh and hip, dragging him into the river in a violent roll that sent mud and bubbles boiling to the surface. Seconds later, Andrew surfaced once, thrashing, before the animal rolled again with a sharp crack heard across the water, then sank. Downstream, it surfaced briefly, his body now limp in its jaws, then disappeared into deeper water, leaving only widening ripples. Rescue crews were called, but no one went into the water. Staff lined the bank with poles and ropes, shouting and striking the surface, but the river gave nothing back. The crocodile did not reappear, and every minute that passed made it clearer the attack was over. Search teams using boats and helicopters searched the river that afternoon. At sunset, they found pieces of clothing and a boot caught in reeds half a mile downstream. The hard hat was found on the levee slope, scratched and broken. His radio remained on the shore, the work channel open with nothing but static. The main body was not found until 3 days later, discovered caught against an underwater branch where crocodiles are known to store prey. The response was quiet. The local council released a statement calling it a workplace accident and stopped riverbank work until further review. Rangers confirmed the crocodile was later caught and put down, measuring 14 feet 3 inches. Andrew's family held a private service in Darwin, where co-workers gathered quietly at the back. At the levee, new signs were installed. No work within 6 feet of the bank without a spotter or ranger present, and all debris clearing to be done by crane from the levee top. The river's silent hunter left no room for escape, proving how little warning comes before a strike. But not all dangers are hidden in murky water. Some circle openly in glass-walled tanks, where safety feels certain until it isn't. It was June 4th, 2014 in Guangzhou, China. The public doors were locked, the aquarium lit by work lights and the blue glow of the shark tank. Pumps hummed behind the walls, and the water sat still in the early morning quiet. Li Cho was 29, an aquarium diver assigned to the big tank. He was not a performer. He cleaned acrylic, checked intakes, and looked over the gravel along the rockwork. He showed up early, finished the list, and moved on to filtration work. He liked pre-opening shifts when the tunnel was empty and the radio stayed quiet. He rented a small room nearby and sent half his pay to his parents. Budget cuts had reduced staff, so he covered extra shifts. His gear was basic: wetsuit, gloves, brush on a pole, short knife, and a surface-supplied airline with a small bailout cylinder. The plan was simple: wipe the tunnel roof and vacuum the corner by the ladder. Quick work before the first school group. The exhibit was 20 feet deep and wide, a curved rectangle with viewing glass on 2 sides and a clear tunnel through the center. The filtration system hummed in a concrete room behind the rockwork. Light from overhead panels slid over floating specks, so the water seemed to snow. From inside the tunnel, 2 janitors mopped and watched fins pass and disappear in the blue. Sand tiger sharks in the exhibit ranged 7 to 10 feet and several hundred pounds. They cruise slowly but can surge quickly. A tail stroke can push them a body length in a second. Conical teeth grip rather than slice, and many bites follow a bump. In tanks, late or missed feeds make them more aggressive around divers. They also swallow air at the surface, which helps them float at mid-depth. Feed delivery had been running late that week, and staff schedules were cut thin. The evening log showed sharks making fast passes near the wall and refusing to enter the holding gate. Both were flagged as elevated arousal. A senior diver had noted that any in-water work should have a supervisor and backup diver present. That morning, a keeper mentioned seeing aggressive behavior near the platform. Li Cho read the notes, signed the board, and decided to work close to the ladder. He entered after a radio check. He brushed the tunnel roof and vacuumed along the rock. The water around him carried the constant hum of pumps and the dull throb of machinery through the walls. A sudden surge broke the stillness. A sand tiger shot from the shadows, slamming into his ribs and clamping onto his side. The brush pole spun away as blood spread in a wide sheet, drifting upward in slow ribbons that clouded the tunnel lights. The force drove him against the ladder, knocking the regulator loose from his mouth. He pushed at the snout and kicked for the rungs. The shark veered off and slid along the wall, circling with slow, deliberate turns. He climbed a few feet up when another shark rose from the far end of the exhibit. It closed on his left forearm, teeth locking above the wrist. The pull folded his body and dragged him from the ladder, his airline snapping taut in a high arc. Janitors inside the tunnel pressed to the glass, one dropping his mop, the other waving frantically toward the control room. Lee broke the surface once, head and shoulders briefly clear, before the animal dragged him under again. A nylon line thrown from above fell short and sank, vanishing into the red cloud spreading near the rockwork. The struggle ended near the bottom. A shark seized his thigh and rolled hard, pulling him into the corner where the acrylic met the rock wall. The turn sent bubbles boiling upward, then silence. The hose looped slack against the glass, swaying in the current. The siren pulse echoed through the hall, the recall tone sounded across the tank, and the sharks resumed slow passes through the tank, mouths opening and closing in their usual rhythm. In the tunnel, the janitors stood rooted in place, breathing hard, staring at the empty water. Divers entered within the hour, following the airline to the bottom, where they recovered him near the rock ledge. His wetsuit was torn at the left sleeve and thigh, the glove was split through, and the regulator mouthpiece was hanging loose. The backup cylinder had never been touched. Medical findings attributed death to severe blood loss combined with drowning after air supply loss. Staff zipped him into a black bag and carried him behind a curtain as the tunnel lights dimmed. The aquarium released a notice blaming equipment failure and closed the exhibit for 2 days. A security camera clip leaked online, only a few seconds long, filmed from the tunnel camera before being quickly removed from local sites. It showed a flash of red and a line jerking across the water. His family received payment. On the staff whiteboard, rules went up. No in-water work without a supervisor and a second diver. No entries within 24 hours of a missed feed. And ladders kept live and clear. Thanks for tuning in. If you're ready, the next story is waiting on the end screen. Another encounter with the unexpected on Animal Quest.